you have to be the biggest skeptic first before you look at any type of UFO investigation. If you don't, you're just going to get swallowed up in the investigation. You start off by trying to eliminate all the possibilities of what the sighting was or whatever the event was. Then you start looking into the non-possibilities or the unknowns, and that's what you start concentrating on. But always address it as a skeptic first. You have to, because over 90% of them are explainable. The whole purpose of my website is to reveal my personal investigations and other people's investigations who work with me to the public. We need to release this information. Let the public decide at that point. If you mass that information, they would never know. And it's really interesting. A lot of people really don't know that much about ufology until you start talking about it. But the bottom line is, you know, I do the work and share all the information to the public. And that's my job.
Chuck Zukowski is an electronics engineer in real life, but by passion, he is a UFO investigator. One of us, honest. Last year alone, he investigated five cattle mutilation cases in the San Luis Valley. Yeah, that's still going on, guys, big time. But by the way, how many of you think you know everything about Roswell? You don't, but you may know everything new about Roswell at the end of this presentation. Please welcome Chuck Zukowski.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay, I guess you can. Hey, good morning. How are you enjoying the conference so far? Oh, I'm excited to be here. Yeah, there was one of those flights coming in. 2 airplanes were stuck at the gate. Just problems. Made it, finally made it. And it's good, too, because today I'm going to be releasing some information that generally UFO investigators don't do, and that's release information of a site of where I've had an eyewitness actually tell us through an interview a couple years ago where they saw military activity back in July of '47. And I've got a couple of other neat things to show you guys. And then also I'm going to talk a little bit about some artifacts that we found back on a 2002 dig that I participated with the Sci-Fi Channel. And of course, how many people out here? I apologize, all I can see is lights, so it's a little difficult to try and focus, especially with my contacts. How many people out here remember Roswell? Everybody knows about Roswell. If you don't know about Roswell, you'll know today. And what's interesting about Roswell is, obviously it happened in July of '47, and what was so important in 1947, of course, in June you had the Kenneth Arnold sighting. And I'm just going to do this real quick. I'm just going to run a lot of slides, get you guys up to speed before I start talking about the meat of the presentation. Then July 3rd, 4th, we had Mac Brazel in Lincoln County finding material. He was with his son, Vern. Later on that year, the National Security Act in July. National Security Council, CIA established, Department of Defense. And then the last couple of things I kind of wanted you to see, the fastest airspeed, obviously, in '47 was 640 miles an hour. So you got to kind of remember that, because things were flying a lot faster in that year than what we could do. And then, of course, in September, the Air Force was created, and then again, Chuck Yeager on October 14th. I'm just checking a couple months to make sure I don't miss anything here. So actually, you know, you had Kenneth Arnold's sighting in June. He basically estimated these crafts were doing 1,200 miles an hour. And then, like I said, in October, you had Chuck Yeager break the sound barrier at, what was that, 662 miles an hour. So in June, a few months before, here Kenneth Arnold estimated seeing objects fly twice as fast as what we could possibly do for the technology of that day. So something was out there flying. When people say, well, you know, we think they were birds out there reflecting, well, there were some pretty fast birds that were doing that. Maybe little jetpacks on them or something. So also, I found this on the internet last year, Tulsa Daily Record on July 13th. So there was also another sighting involving aircraft of unusually high speeds. This particular former military person estimated 1,700 miles an hour. So you know, now we're looking almost 3 times as fast as what Chuck Yeager could do. So what happened? And
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army. Army officers say the missile, found sometime last week, has been inspected at Roswell, New Mexico, and sent to Wright Field, Ohio, for further inspection.
What's interesting about this particular segment, and that was the actual audio, and you can find that everywhere on the internet, is what happened. Like, I guess I can use this one here. This little video here, I'm not quite sure if, you know, some people say it came from Area 51. I found it on the internet. Alejandro actually has a really good copy of it too, and some others say it was White Sands. But what happened in 47 was something came down. I don't know, you can't see it right there. Anyway, I'll just do it right here. Something came down off the right side of Roswell, skipped over near the Foster Ranch, or at the Foster Ranch, and left a bunch of debris. And some skeptics in the past said, oh, nothing will skip. Well, I've always talked about, you know, where you have the Frisbee effect, where you can get a Frisbee to skip. And when we found this little video here, it clearly shows that somebody is filming something coming down and skipping off the ground. And then it skips, leaves a bunch of debris, and then comes down and impacts. So you can see the skip there, and then it's going to come down and impact. Well, that's what happened in Roswell back in 47. The best we can figure was, one of the theories is that there was 2 craft, and for some reason or another, they collided. Might have had to do with the horrific thunderstorm at that time, and I'll talk a little bit later on about the possibility of radar, direct beam radar could have caused it. But either way, one theory is a skip or a hit. One went down over in Lincoln County. The other one, the plains of St. Augustine. So that's one of the theories. And these basically are the key players, individuals and their roles. And I'm going to go over this just real quick, just to get you up to speed, of course. Mac Brazel, we'll just start at the top left. Mac Brazel obviously found the debris. He was with his son, Vern. Original stories said that he was with Dee Proctor, a kid that lived down the street. Well, down, not the street, it was down the next ranch. And it wasn't until we interviewed Fawn Fritz, a little bit later on, you'll see her in the video, that she said, you know, that Vern was out there, his son, and which made a little more sense, because why would he be with somebody else's kid? So him and his son basically found this debris. What happened is around the July 3rd period, there was a thunderstorm going on. They heard some unusual explosive sounds. Of course, it could be thunderstorms. But what's interesting, and I've learned this over the years, because I've been researching Roswell about 20 years now and doing hard field investigation for the past 10, I started to learn a lot about sheep. And with the introduction earlier about me doing cattle mutilations, I'm learning a lot about cows now too. But sheep aren't very smart, unfortunately. And what happens with sheep is if there's a lot of loud noises, if there's, you know, thunderstorms, or if there's even a fire, unlike cows, cows will move away in a single file. Sheep will run away, and then if there's a fence, they'll run into the fence, and then they start piling on top of each other, and they end up killing the sheep underneath. They kind of do a sheep pile, I guess, instead of a dog pile. And so the ranchers would have to go out there and actually look for the sheep and make sure they're okay. my sister Debbie and I, she's an investigator out of Missouri, and we team up together to investigate Roswell. We were out there a couple years ago when they did have a fire out there in Lincoln County. We talked to one of the ranchers, and he lost about 30 herd of sheep or so because they ran up to a fence. And instead of walking along the fence to get away from the fire, they just stayed by the fence. The fire came over because they have grass fires there all the time. So I can imagine what it smelled like burning a wool sweater. So Mac Brazel went out there to check on the sheep, and he finds this material. And then at the time, you know, of course there's stories of UFOs and all kinds of nifty stuff, and he contacts Sheriff Wilcox. I'll talk about that a little bit later. Sheriff Wilcox out of Roswell. Say there wasn't really a deputy in this little town of Corona that's near Lincoln County. So he had to go into Corona, and there was only, I think, 3 phones in Corona that actually had long-distance lines to Roswell back in '47, because it was, you know, it's not like cellular now. They actually had to run a wire. So he contacts Sheriff Wilcox from Corona, makes arrangements, goes down there, shows the material. Sheriff Wilcox contacts Colonel Blanchard, who is the base commander for Roswell Army Air Force Base. Colonel Blanchard sends out Major Marcel and Sheridan Cavett. Marcel was like the crash retrieval specialist for the base, so he would know what type of material Mac had found on his ranch. While this is all going on, well, actually, somewhat after that, Glenn Dennis, the local mortician there, almost said Morticia, that'd be like the Addams Family. He was a local mortician. He gets a call from the base asking for 3 child-sized caskets, and he's really confused about that. Interesting thing about Glenn Dennis is basically, and when I interviewed him a few times, he basically said that sometimes the base would call him and he'd have to go out to a crash site for some type of experimental plane or just a plane that went down, and he would take 5-gallon buckets and he would pretty much pick up our servicemen or our pilots and put them in the bucket because there was so much carnage there. And when they asked him about the child-sized coffins, it kind of threw him. He didn't know why, because why do we have kids out there and why do you need coffins? So that was pretty interesting. And I'll talk a little bit about that too. Some new stuff. I talked to an eyewitness last year. Anyway, Frank Joyce was the individual who worked for the radio station that Mac Brazel had talked to originally, and the information was released, and then he goes back to Frank Joyce later on with a different explanation, saying it was a weather balloon after he was with the military. General Ramey was the general at the time over at Fort Worth, Texas, that was orchestrating the cover-up. And then our buddy Stanton Friedman. Stanton, and the reason why I put Stanton as a key role, because if it wasn't for Stanton, we wouldn't be here, and I wouldn't, talking about Roswell, you'd still be here, but I wouldn't be here talking about Roswell, we'd talk about something else. Back in 1978, he found Marcel and was able to interview him. And then within 2 years, I think he had another 62 or 63 eyewitnesses that he found within the next couple of years, all about Roswell. So it's pretty interesting stuff. Okay, now what's funny about this, and Colonel Blanchard, who when he passed away was 4-star General Blanchard, and my sister and I found his gravesite actually at the Air Force Academy, and I'm from Colorado Springs, so it was very convenient. It was right there. So here's a guy back in '47, the commander of the Roswell Army Air Force Base, comes out with this great story that they've captured this flying disc. And then within a day, not even within a day, the same day basically, the situation was turned. It turned out to be a weather balloon. I mean, how embarrassing is that? You got to remember, there was only 2 bases in 1947 that really gave a damn with our country, and that was RAAF, who trained the crew for the Enola Gay. They were our first atomic base, basically. So they were our Strategic Air Command base. The other one was Wright Field in Ohio, which is now Wright-Patterson. They had the foreign technology department there where they could reverse engineer things. So here's a commander of a base, a pretty important base, that doesn't know the difference between a weather balloon and a flying saucer. Yet, he made 4-star. Why did he make 4-star? Because he followed orders. So how do we know when we're looking at the right place? And what I've done is since 10, 11 years ago, I got coordinates from Glenn Dennis, from himself, BLM GPS coordinates of a BLM marker. And you can see the BLM marker right there. So my sister and I think we were out there in 1999, 2000, somewhere around there, when we started investigating the actual debris site. And you just can't go out there. You just can't ask people, hey, where is the site? Because they keep it's pretty secret. People usually don't talk about it. I don't give out the GPS coordinates because, first off, it's BLM. Secondly, there's ranchers all around there, and there's a 99-year lease on that land, so the ranchers can, their sheep and cows can graze on it, and they don't like a lot of people going through there. And we don't want the site salted too with a lot of people going out there, so we try and keep it somewhat, confidential. But we know in the right area when you see that BLM marker. The other two markers, obviously, is the Hind House, which was we called it, Foster Ranch, but they called it the Hind's House. That's the actual house, or that Mac Brazel stayed back in '47. Behind it was a little shed where he put some of the material. They called it the Hind's House because originally there was a Hind's Draw right next to it. And then the windmill. I don't know if you can see the windmill over there. Anyway, I usually call this the Roswell Triangle because really you have the BLM marker, you have the house, and you have the windmill, and the debris is kind of in the middle, so it kind of worked out pretty well. The issue is over the years, the different people you talk to that actually live out there, and I've talked to a couple of the ranchers out there and their kids, and they all say, oh yeah, something went down over there back in '47. Well, how do you know? Well, because, of the windmill and because of the BLM marker. And so there's actual markers there that they've been able to use. The windmill, unfortunately, when we were there last year, all the little blades are gone off the windmill. So real quick, I'm just saying, so we were out there. This is over near the BLM marker. First thing you kind of do is you go out there, you metal detectors, you're trying to find something. You don't know what you're looking for. UFO investigation is very creative. Not only do you have to think out of the box, you have to think off the planet. So you have to be really, really creative and come up. You don't know what you're looking for. And it's not material that we can really have that we can really look at and compare. Now what's interesting about 47, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit later too, is another story was Jim Ragsdale's site. So basically where the debris came down, and that's the place where I've been doing my investigations, and my sister has. We're looking for debris there. That was a skip site. We call that, the debris field is a skip site. And then 17 miles, we think, further down is where the thing actually impacted. One story is Jim Ragsdale was over by Boy Scout Mountain, which is at the El Capitan. It's kind of a slope at the El Capitan Mountains there. And what was it? I don't know if he was committing adultery. I guess he kind of was committing adultery. He was in the back of his pickup truck with a married woman, and they saw these lights come down. Anyway, to make a long story short, or a short story long, because they were buck naked, but that came right out. That came right out of his affidavit. They saw military out there. Now, a lot of other researchers dismissed the Ragsdale sighting or the Ragsdale story because there's been inconsistencies. I leave it open, and I'll tell you why I leave it open. I'll show you later on, and you'll go, who? Well, that's kind of interesting. I'd leave it open too. But this particular case is where he saw the military come in. I think he saw 3 or 4 bodies and the military cleaning up. So that's one area. We're out there 2002, and we went to the skip site. Basically, we went out with the Sci-Fi Channel as, my sister and I went out as a volunteer archaeology, UFO archaeology group. And the whole purpose for this particular 2-hour special that the Sci-Fi put out was to talk a little about Roswell, obviously, and do some archaeology work at the actual debris site. Let's see. These are some key players. I threw this in there because I'll talk about this a little later. I think I showed the same frame again. Major Edwin Easley was a provost marshal over at RAF, and from what we understand, he was in charge of retrieving and picking up some of the debris. As it turns out, his daughter was there, Nancy Easley's Johnson, to help us with the dig, and no one knew who she was until she introduced herself to me. I'm going, you don't know Ed? And she goes, yeah. And I'm like, whoa, no way. Am I fading? Hello, can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Should I hold my cell phone up? Okay, so we're out there and we're doing these digs, and I got to bring this up real quick. We had a University of New Mexico out there helping us. Basically, they were telling us how to do these particular digs, and we were doing 50 centimeter by 50 centimeter square holes, and we were digging down to the Jurassic period, and it really didn't make sense to me. And I had done some archaeology work before in the past looking for Anasazi's material, so I kind of knew how far you had to go down for 800 years. So then I figured, well, how far do you have to go down just for the past 60 years? You don't go down to, the Jurassic area. So Dr. Dolman and I, who we are now very, very good friends, we had it out like 1 o'clock in the morning out there in Roswell before this particular dig. I said, what are you doing? You're wasting our time. Anyway, so make a long story short, he allowed me to do a strip dig. And a strip dig is basically 1 meter by 5 meter segments at about 8 to 10 centimeters down. Basically, I said, Dr. Dolman, you're a 25 at the time, a 24-year archaeology veteran PhD. How far do I have to go down just to 1947 based on the erosion rate of this area? And he kind of told me. And we said, okay, we're just going to do some strip digs and let's see if we can find something. As it turns out, this particular strip dig that was 3 5-meter segments yielded the most artifacts found for that show. Just because I was honoring and I was, I'm telling an archaeologist, he doesn't know what the hell he's doing. Basically, he's never looked for UFOs before, so he really didn't think about it. He was just following what the other investigators were telling him to do. Anyway, bottom line is, any type of artifacts we did find, we document them. The little bar there to the left, they can't see the laser, but that's something that Jesse Marcel Jr. remembered seeing. I kind of threw that up there because, there was a particular type of material we were looking for based on other people's research and our research, talking to actual eyewitnesses. So certain things we wanted to find. I was going to run through this real quick. So 2003, the local museum there set up a display for the dig, and then we donated our Marshall trawls and our knee pads to the museum. Then we're back again, 2004. And the reason I'm kind of going through this real quick is because just to let you know, you don't go out there and do this once. You find something, you go out again, and you have to go back over and over, and you try to talk to more people, and it's an ongoing thing. It's not something that, if you go out there one time and you say, I did an investigation, well, you kind of did, but you never really did a follow-up on it. So, but there's people out there that do it. They'll do something once, go out there and write a book on it. It just bugs me. 2005, we're back out there again. This time we're looking for, there's stories about material being hidden in sinkholes and old wells and all kinds of nifty things. So I'm there, looking at a map on the upper left-hand corner. We're trying to track down all the wells. We're trying to look for caves. Of course, you're only limited to public land, obviously, because that little sign over there was actually D. Proctor's sign, and basically it said, if you trespass, I'll shoot you. And you get a lot of that out there. You get that in Colorado, too. So you have to really be careful. You have to abide by the law. Trust me, I know, because I'm also a deputy sheriff. So I have to say that. Back to the debris site, 2006. Sci-Fi Channel did a 6-part episode show called Sci-Fi Investigates. Since the 2002 issue I had with Dr. Dolman, we became very good friends. He was part of the team for their show in 2006. He called me up, and I called my sister, and we went and we volunteered as UFO archaeologists again for their show. And basically, we're out there filming another show. My sister and I gives us another opportunity to do another archaeology dig to look for more material. Here on the upper left-hand corner, Rich Dolan will be speaking a little bit later. He was part of the show. Boston Rob, who is now on Survivor again. I guess he's the bad guy. He was also on the show too. Here I was teaching. I hate to say teaching, but boy, I tell you, Rich Dolan was sure sore after that. We were out there and we worked them. And we worked Boston Rob too. And Boston Rob wasn't a bad guy. He's an okay guy. But basically, I'm showing them how to do UFO archaeology. And we find a horse bridle. And, you know, I kind of found it, and then we held back, and they filmed it, and they found it. And anyway, what's so big deal about a horse bridle? And I'll talk about that a little bit later, but it's still kind of interesting. Okay, this is going to, I have an audio coming up here now with Fawn Fritz. Fawn Fritz was Mac Brazel's granddaughter, which it says there. And one of the things that really bothered me was through the years, Mac had told Frank Joyce, after he came back the second time with the different story of the crash, they were talking about green aliens, and he said they weren't green. And that's always bugged me, because a lot of the stories that you read from these books, you know, they had Mac Brazel stuck at the base, like, you know, they confiscated him, put him aside for a couple of weeks, and you never heard from him. Well, the story goes, based on, you know, talking to family members, and it would make sense, is they took Mac Brazel back out to his field, because he knows the area, he knows that whole ranch, and he's out there showing them, you know, the areas, showing them the sinkhole, all kinds of neat stuff. And what happened is about 3 miles or so away from the debris site, he's on horseback with military personnel, and they smell something pretty horrific. They see the vultures, and they come across 2 bodies and some more wreckage. And what I can figure is the craft came down, skipped, left debris there at the skip site, debris site, and it must have turned, because when it came down and skipped, it must have tore a hole in the side, and as it spun, a couple of little guys fell out with some more debris, and then it came down and impacted. And that's where we think Mac Brazel saw the bodies and was able to say they weren't green. And this is, let's see if this works.
They had Grandpa with them.
Yeah.
I know that to be a fact. I know Grandpa was with them. And I'm just, speculation, this is when they made the big discovery, because it was, you know, quite a ways away.
Where they found the bodies?
Yeah.
Would that be the bodies and the rest of the crash?
The rest of the crash, yeah.
And that would be, what,
the
like
main part of the
southeast?
Southeast, yeah.
5 miles? Or do you have an idea, you think?
I don't think it was that far.
See, we think there's a site like 2.5 miles.
Okay, that sounds about right.
Southeast,
Yeah.
so it'd be this side of the windmill.
Yeah, no.
We were
No,
actually going to take you
I'm
there
sorry.
this morning.
On the other side of the windmill, but on this side, on the other side of the windmill.
Right.
Okay.
That's the
Right.
D. Proctor
Yeah,
site where
Yeah.
D said Mac found something else. He said, this is where Mac found something else.
Well, like I said, Grandpa being the person that he was, and knowing how he was around living things,
Yep.
if Grandpa would have found that horseback, he probably would have had one of them laid across his saddle
Sure.
and held up to let her get help, you know,
Sure.
if they would have been alive.
But if you saw him 3 or 4 days later, it's because the military took him?
I'm going to say yes.
Okay.
Because he had no way to even dream that there was something like that.
And I wanted you to hear that, because basically that's usually how an interview goes, because we're learning. What you don't want to do, and you heard me going, well, was it over there? Was it this side of the windmill? Was it the other side of the windmill? This is an eyewitness. Okay, this was a person whose family member was part of the incident. You're not going to sit there and tell them. That's called leading the witness. You don't tell them. You try and get them to tell you, and that's what I was trying to do. So, but basically, for all you investigators out there, just make sure that you don't lead the witness and get them to say what you want them to say, or you'll never go anywhere. You end up going around in circles. Bottom line was here we had the granddaughter of Mac Brazel say that he found the bodies, basically. So that kind of, you know, summed up some of the ideas that we had previously talking to different individuals, and the whole purpose of, well, you know, how did Mac, or why did Mac say they weren't green? So we're back again in 2007. This time we're looking at animal burrows. We're looking at unusual ground formations and sinkholes. And I'm going to go back to the horse bridle real quick that was found in 2006. And if you watched the show, they made a deal about it. They go, oh, it's just a horse bridle. And they kind of tossed it. What was interesting about that, though, is I didn't think about it at the time, and it wasn't until December that year I woke up at about 1 o'clock in the morning, and I don't know why I was even thinking about it during Christmas, but I woke up going, what an idiot. So we should have looked at the horse bridle. And the reason why we should have looked at the horse bridle, because one of the stories is the debris was laid out there, you know, 300 yards or quarter mile, whatever. It all depends on who you talk to. And maybe 300 yards is quarter mile. I'll sit there and figure that out. And about 3 years after that, animals would not cross the debris field after obviously it was all picked up. And Mac and the ranch hands would actually have to take the sheep and herd them all the way around. And remember the windmill? Well, that's where the water was. And the grazing area is over here where the BLM marker was, and they had to try and move them across. They would never cross there. There's been some stories where the horse would rear up and buck off the cowboys. Thus, the horse's bridle. So I'm thinking, I need to get a hold of that horse's bridle that's being held at the University of New Mexico Archaeology Warehouse and take a look at it to see how it was broken. Was it worn, or did it shear off? If it sheared off as if the animal reared up, then we got, hey, you know, that's kind of interesting. Yeah, it could have been a rattlesnake or whatever else, but we found it right smack at the debris site, the proposed debris site, based on Mac Brazel and other people's eyewitness statements saying that that's the proper area. So I got a hold of it, and I took it to a semiconductor company where I worked, and they put it under an electron scanning microscope. It was really designed to look at microchips. It had this piece of horse bridle, and I was just kind of look at the edge. And that was the whole purpose, was looking for the edge and make sure how it was sheared off. What we didn't expect to find was titanium. And we're thinking, now we know the horse's bridle is made out of iron, but why are we finding titanium? Well, titanium was on the dust particles attached to the horse's bridle, so there was titanium actually in the ground. And now I'm thinking, okay, why is there titanium in the ground? Is it indigenous to the area? This is something you have to work with. So you start checking out and you start researching the area. El Capitan was a dormant volcano, and one time exploded. We figured, well, you know, they could have spewed titanium out. We really didn't manufacture titanium, you know, for industry until the early 50s. But yet we found, you can see the spike of titanium there, kind of in the middle. It's kind of hard to see the laser. So now what do you do? Well, obviously if a volcano spewed out thousands of years ago, then there should be titanium everywhere. So unlike cattle mutilation investigations where you take a soil sample next to the animal and then another soil sample 50 yards away, or not 50 yards, 50 feet away to compare the difference, because you need a close proximity for cattle. For a volcano, you could go, 50 miles. And so we wanted to make sure that we didn't want to be too close to the debris site, so we took a sample 30 miles away. And we took a couple samples, and out of the samples we took, no titanium showed up in the soil samples. It doesn't mean that there's only titanium there at the debris site. It just means, it's kind of interesting that here's a sample we took. There's no titanium, and there's titanium. There's some other things, too. I can talk to you guys later if you want to talk to me about it. 2 other artifacts that I checked on, the Chuck Wade one and the Bob White object. I got a hold of pieces from both those investigations, a random under scanning microscope. We picked up titanium, aluminum on that too, so that was interesting. And I'll go on that a little bit later. Geraldine Perkins. I had the pleasure of interviewing Geraldine Perkins. She passed away in 2008. I interviewed her when she was 99 years old. She ran a drugstore in Corona. She had one of the 3 long-distance lines, and she seems to think that Mac Brazel had used her phone in her drugstore because her drugstore was the place to go and everybody used her phone. So she figured that's where he used the phone to contact Sheriff Wilcox. And she thought it was interesting when I interviewed her and I'll click right here about Mac had never talked about the incident. Now, when I interviewed her, she was partially deaf and blind, and her daughter Cheryl was there. So you hear her daughter's voice asking her mom.
They investigated it at all. They took him with them. That's the only way they could find him.
It would make sense. How would they know any difference?
The thing about that Mom remembers about Matt Roswell particularly is that he never, ever, ever, ever talked about it. Ever. Around town or anything. Which, of course, is the reason that we think that it's probably true. Because he never talked about it.
That just doesn't make sense. If it was a weather balloon, what's the big deal?
But he just didn't talk about it.
The reason I like to have you guys listen to this is because some investigators will come up there and say, well, I interviewed so-and-so, and this is what they said.
And during the incident in 1947, was there anything strange where you had to give any type of medication for people being sick or animals? I guess animals, you wouldn't deal with animals, but...
She had a veterinary department in the general area.
And that was one of our keys we're looking at, because there are some stories where people, were sick in that area due to whatever happened, and I was just wondering if she remembers that.
Did you hear him? I remember what. If you remember anybody requesting medication for being sick around that time, or anything that you needed for cattle, I mean not for cattle necessarily, but from the veterinary department for sick animals. The cows that turned white were supposedly over around Dattle.
Okay, and that's what I was trying to explain was, what I like to do with the people who come watch me lectures, I like to actually have you listen to some of the interviews. That way you know I'm not just up here BSing you, that I'm actually getting this information from eyewitnesses. And the reason why I thought that the rumor about the cows being bleached was interesting, we had asked her, obviously, was there any problems with people or animals during that July week of 1947. She had the only drugstore, therefore she had the only drugs in the area. Also, she had a small veterinary department section. And remember back then, the ranchers, the cowboys, they took care of their own animals. And a couple of ranchers that came in and asked her, do you have anything for a possible virus or something? There's been some animals down in Dattle, which is over by the plains of St. Augustine. Remember the plains of St. Augustine? That's where that second craft supposedly went down. Okay? So there are a couple cows over there that had turned white. Now, they weren't dead, but they turned white. Now, no one else has got this information because no one else took the time to go over and talk to Geraldine Perkins, for gosh sakes. And I did. We go over and we talk to people in Corona, people in Roswell, Corona. You talk to the people down there too because they've been there for the longest. Anyway, another thing that her daughter mentioned, because I talked to her about D. Proctor. D. Proctor, what the story goes is Mac Brazel and his son saw the original debris, and they come back and then they go to the Proctor Ranch, and then D, who was just about the same age, within a year or so of Vern, they go back again to see the debris, and that's where D. Proctor comes in. That's where he saw the debris. He never really talked about it. And when he passed away a couple of years ago, he was basically an alcoholic all of his life. One time, Cheryl remembers that he was in a local pool hall, drunk, and he finally just fessed up to it and said, yeah. So all the other years, he wouldn't talk about it. But you wouldn't know that unless you talked to the locals in that area. Back again, we're looking at erosion rates, seeing how our previous digs worked. And then I met this guy, because this is an ongoing investigation. I'm not giving you his last name. But what's nice about this was, he knew Glenn Dennis back in 47. And there's always been an issue with, Glenn Dennis talked about the child-sized coffins, what I talked about you earlier. And we don't know whether or not he came up with that story or that was actually a real story. Because, you get a lot of skeptics say, well, Stanton Friedman started talking about it in the early 80s, and he could have just came up with it. Well, here's an eyewitness that said, oh no, he talked about him. He talked about him to him.
He was a mortician at the time, and I worked at a little drugstore down the street from the mortuary, and I'd go down there and talk to him and all that sort of stuff. And we'd throw the ball back and forth.
So you're right there by Ballard?
Yeah, right by Ballard's Funeral Home. It's right on Southeast Main.
Yeah, I know exactly.
It's an Ava Riot.
Yeah.
That's where I worked.
Okay.
But anyway, he mentioned he was. God, there was somebody else there too. Someone that I can't remember. I didn't know him, but he was talking to this man, and he says, "Yeah, we had to order 3 child caskets from Clovis because we didn't have them here in Roswell."
Huh.
And then he was telling that he knew the officer in charge out at the base that did something, and she was a lady. And he said when he took the caskets out there, I don't know if he said the bodies were in the casket or what. You know, I really don't remember that part of it.
Now, did he take it to the, where did he take it to?
To the air base,
to the
Air Force Base.
So Roswell Army Air Force?
Hangar, whatever it was, I don't know.
It was.
But anyway, he said this woman wouldn't let him go in, this officer. And he said, well, heck, I'm the one that brought this out here. Brought them out here.
And that's what, you know, I kind of wanted to, I'll just skip through the next one because it's basically the same thing. So now we have an eyewitness that states that back in the late 40s, Glenn Dennis had told him about the child-sized coffins. And that's pretty huge. And the reason why it's so huge now is now we're going before Stanton Freeman, you know, had made this public. And before, I think there was another book out in the mid-50s about a similar crash that a lot of skeptics and debunkers say that people read, and they said that's where the Roswell information came from. We have an eyewitness back in the late 40s that said, oh no, I know Glenn. Glenn said this, and I'll never ever forget it. Now we have eyewitness Gale. And I'm going to play this real quick. I think we have like 22 minutes, so I may not have time for Q&A. You can talk to me afterwards, because this is some really good information. Got a couple of things about Gale. Gale's going to talk about, well, I'll just have you listen to what she's talking about. Basically, she was on a ranch in the 4th of July. You got to remember, this all came down around the 4th of July. I think it was Friday, so it was 5th, 6th. It was a 3-day holiday. And their family was moving off this ranch into Roswell. They bought a house in Roswell. Well, they came back out to the ranch for this 3-day weekend to move more stuff. When they came back out to the ranch, and I'll explain this. This is one of the new sites I'm going to talk to you about. The military came through there. Now, it wasn't a county road, so they were out on the ranch road. And I'll have you listen to her.
Dad said there was all this traffic. They had these big army trucks with lots of soldiers. So then the next day, Mom and I went out with Dad to pick some more stuff up. And that's when we ran into, after we were on the ranch, these big vehicles, and you could look out. I could look out the window, and all I saw was wheels. I mean, you know, they were big stuff. And they had like 6 military fellows on them. And now they were not our lean little Wrangler cowboys. These were what I call Nebraska cornbread. I mean, they were like 6 foot. They were fat. They were well bent, right, you know? And they were not pleasant. They were not pleasant at all. They were sitting on the sides, and, you know, you just got off the road, or they would have flattened you, kid. And they had a couple standing up and one in the center. And when they got close to headquarters, the guy in the middle stood up, and he's got this automatic. What was that? What did they need guns for? You know, we haven't created a war.
Now, was this? Now, when she said headquarters, that's the headquarters of the ranch where their little general store and the blacksmith and all that other stuff would be, not the military headquarters. And I had to ask her that question, like, the military had a headquarters there? No, that's what they called headquarters. And as a little girl, this is something that you don't forget, you know, military forcing you to stay inside your home, get off the streets. And they're in and out of there within 3 days or so. I'm going to pass the next one. Basically, it's she's talking about where the relatives, she believes, were paid to be quiet after the fact because some of them were able to buy houses which they couldn't afford, and they always remember that. And out of the whole family, her and her cousin talked about it, but whenever she mentioned it to her dad would just tell her, don't ever speak of it again, and on and on. So, I mean, there was a cover-up going on. Now, we're talking about a new investigation site. Now, I interviewed this witness, and this witness told me where the ranch was. Now, the ranch is not where other people had talked about where the impact site or another debris site would be. So here's a new site that I'm going to introduce to you guys. You can all help me if you're ever down in the area. Just be nice, play nice with the locals there. If you ever go on the ranch, and it's BLM, so it's public, so you're allowed to go over there and you can talk to people if you like. And if you find out information, let me know. Because I'm here to talk to you people about it. I don't get paid for this. Well, maybe for this, but not for everything. And we were there. We're checking out this new site. Now, where is this site? Where was her ranch? This is a good one. Remember the Lincoln County War? How many people remember? Do you know the Lincoln County War? No. Let's see. Where's my last one? There it goes. The Flying H Ranch. Now you're thinking, where have I heard of Flying H Ranch? Any history buffs out here, Western history? Billy the Kid, John Tunstall. John Tunstall took in Billy the Kid and as a ranch hand. And what happened was at the time John Tunstall had teamed up with, I think, McSweeney and, oh, guess what? John Chisholm. Not John Wayne. John Chisholm, although John Wayne played John Chisholm in one of his movies. So that was pretty big back then. And they were cattle ranchers, and they opened up a ranch, a general store, and a bank. And they were in competition with the other people who owned the bank and the store. And the other individuals that were running it in that area decided that they didn't want Tunstall involved in this. And basically they hired a posse made out of outlaws. This is right like out of a Western movie, I swear to gosh. And the outlaws went over basically and killed John Tunstall, shot him. Well, Billy the Kid happened to be working on the ranch, and some of the ranch hands actually saw that. So Billy was part of a group, I think, called the Renegades, if I remember history. And that was, when Billy the Kid started becoming popular after they started taking out the posse that killed John Tunstall. Well, this is the Flying H Ranch. Very important. I'm going to skip this too because we're running out of time. Basically, I was talking about the debris site, which I already talked about, but you can see the GPS coordinates off to the right. And by using my GPS, you see the straight line on that GPS? This is my good old handheld sport track. Works great. That straight line, believe it or not, is I'm standing on the debris site at the Foster Ranch near the Hines house. The straight line goes over the Jim Ragsdale, which I talked to you earlier about, the Jim Ragsdale site where he was in the back of his pickup truck with the lady. On the opposite side is the Flying H Ranch. Straight line. Could have something came down, skipped, left debris there, and kept on going just due to velocity, speed, direction. Very, very important. These are one of these things where you go, this is amazing. Why is this happening? Coincidence, or all of a sudden are these stories starting to match up? And that's, as an investigator, that's what you look for. You look for a commonality in everything that you people you interview and things that you. Okay, 1947. I'll go past this real quick. Okay, this is a map that I found on eBay from 1944, an aeronautical map. I want to show this real quick, and the reason why I want to show this is, it's kind of. Well, you can't see this. But anyway, off to the right, you see some shaded areas. Those were basically the no-fly zones on the right. The shaded areas on the left are the no-fly zones. Also, the right side is Roswell Army Air Force Base. The no-fly zones on the left, White Sands Missile Base. No shaded areas in the middle, right? Well, because those are the there is a fly zone in the middle. That's where the debris site is. That's where the Ragsdale site is. That's where the Flying H Ranch is. It's in the middle area. And you're thinking, oh, that's kind of interesting. Well, let's see, Roswell Army Air Force Base, they use direct beam radar. right? Back in the 40s, before Doppler. White Sands the same way. If you talk to the ranchers over there, if they saw an object off in the distance, the military, they would turn up, and we're talking about the same microwave that you have in your house. They'd turn up the juice to try and get a better signature on the object. Well, if any birds flew in between that, they'd get burned up. And you could talk to the old ranchers there, and they'll tell you about they used to find burned birds, and that was one of the reasons. So now on the right-hand side, if you got Roswell Air Force Base running their radar, White Sands running theirs, there's something that's flying around there. Logical that they would kind of fly in the middle, try and get out of the radar, especially if they're picking it up. Coincidence? Oh, it's one of the other things that you kind of look at. So last year I did a press release with my sister in Roswell. I'm going to show this real quick.
Good afternoon. It has been debated for more than 60 years. Now, some say groundbreaking evidence could prove that aliens did in fact visit Roswell. News 13's Ian Schwartz is live in Roswell to tell us about the discovery.
I like this guy.
Kim, in 2002, UFO investigators, some from the University of New Mexico, found small pieces of debris near a site where many believe a UFO crashed outside of Roswell in 1947. Well, the group today that was discussing this did some preliminary tests. They found that the mystery material is not native to the Roswell area, but it is found on Earth. This piece is aluminum silicone. Investigator Chuck Zukowski says he wants an in-depth scientific study to find out how the material ended up near the alleged crash site. He says this debris, though, is a big piece to the puzzle.
We do our investigations and we look for something tangible that we can put our fingers on as evidence, and we can say, yes, in fact, something occurred there, and this is what we think it is or what we don't know it is, but at least we're looking for evidence. Okay, a little bit about...
Today the group did gather to ask the public for help after running out of money for the test. It's asking anyone in the scientific community to help them test these materials to figure out their origin. And part of their plan is to get all these tests done and hopefully have their findings ready for the UFO Festival, which will begin in early July. Back to you, Kim.
Okay, thanks, Ian. Now, the group's 2002 dig was funded in part by the Sci-Fi Channel and the UFO investigators. Well, today's web...
And basically, you do everything. The Sci-Fi Channel just, basically paid for what they needed. Anything else that we want to do, it comes out of our pockets, and that includes any testing. And we released this last year before I lectured with my sister at Roswell last year. And we're hoping to pick up a couple labs that would be interested in actually analyzing some of the material we found in 2002. What had happened, though. And I'm just going to run through these real quick. Description of the artifacts. You can see all those artifacts. Majority of them right here in the center section were all taken out of the debris, that strip dig that I talked to you about. But what happened was there's been some BLM issues where supposedly we found any artifacts, the artifacts had to be transferred from one location to another. So they're in the process of being transferred to a permanent position for archival before we can actually get them back out. What happened is I didn't know that, and that was a contract with BLM, and so I called up the individuals at the University of New Mexico, and I checked out one of the artifacts, and I did a test on it. It's all legal as far as I'm concerned. I did all the paperwork, and they approved it. And so so you see this little artifact we found in 2002, looked at that, took it to a scanning electron microscope analysis, compared it with this is like the third time that I did this, so where I already knew what to compare it with. So I'm comparing it with a known metal because we picked up elements of aluminum. So the top part is the artifact, the bottom part is just a piece of aluminum. So you're just kind of doing a comparison to see the difference. This right here is the analysis of known metal. This is basically aluminum foil, and you can see the big spike, that's aluminum. This one right here is the analysis of the artifact, and look at that, it's aluminum too. Interesting. And we're getting down here, I think, if you look at the right picture, it's 150 microns. A micron is what, 1 minus 10 to the 9, or 1 times 10 to the minus 9th. So it's pretty small. When you get even smaller to 80 microns, you can see some really unusual damage on this little piece of aluminum. Now, we found this under 8 centimeters worth of dirt. So out in the middle of the desert. And there's trace elements of silicon in there too. So you can see the unusual damage on the left-hand side, and then when you get real close, you can see some really interesting things. Now here, if you look at 180 microns, you can see some kind of hairs coming out. And you look at the right-hand side at 24 microns, something's coming out. It's really, really amazing whatever the heck this thing is. And it's aluminum silicon. Now, aluminum silicon alloy, I think it was created back in the 40s in Europe, or maybe earlier than that, and then we were messing around with it in the 40s. So it's interesting, though. And so we need further analysis on that. There are also some other interesting things. HUMUOs are basically an acronym that Dr. Bill came up with. It's just unusual objects. I'll go through real quick. We found shoe parts, possibly from Army boot, who knows. This is all found underground. White fibers, not hair. You know, we've already had an archaeologist look at this stuff. He said they're fibers. We're trying to, and it's not organic. Unusual scoring on a couple of rocks. Thread, dark green thread. Possible cowboy uniform or shirt, still found underground. Possibly military uniform. You know, because the military out there, and they spend a couple of days cleaning this stuff up, and it depends on who you talk to. You know, at first they were out there walking hand in hand, cleaning this stuff up, and then it was shoulder to shoulder, then they were on their hands and knees. Interesting stuff, he found some orange blobs, and they couldn't figure that out. Well, I had talked to him, this is where that frame comes back, I had talked to Nancy Easley Johnson about her father, who was a provost marshal, and she had said on his deathbed that he came clean and said basically there were aliens, and then he mentioned the color orange. And coincidence? That's another one of those things we have to look at. So basically, what we did last year was we're looking for further funding on the artifacts that we've already found. Because the electron scanning microscope, I had that done 3 times at $300 a pop. And that came out of my pocket. And I don't get reimbursed for that. Yeah, that's just the love of the investigation. That's what UFO, that's the difference between actual field investigators and people who we call couch investigators. They sit and watch the stuff on TV, and then they comment about it, and they get on my website and harass me about it, but they never go out in the field. They never taken the time to go out in the field or the sacrifice of actually taking it out of their checkbook and paying for the stuff. I just got finished paying $600 for some new cameras for ghost hunting. So that's kind of interesting. Anyway, so we need the press release was to look for a lab to help us out. And the lab has got to be able to release to the public their results. Now, I've had a couple of people come up to me already from private labs and say, yeah, we'll do it, but we're in charge of it. I said, no. You get, and this is the benefits, this is the pro bono, it has to be pro bono, I'm not paying for this. You have to disclose the analysis to the public. And number 4, you're cool in the UFO community for doing it. And you can, after you disclose it, you want to write books or what do you want to do for your lab, that's up to you. But the information has got to come out, and it's not going to be stuck and sitting in some lab for the next few years because they might have found something and they're going to try and benefit with it and build a frickin' hotel in space, and that's a whole nother story there. Our buddy Bigelow. So, as of last week, what's the status of the artifacts? Well, the artifacts right now are being transferred to the Maxwell Museum of Anthropology at the University of New Mexico, as per Dr. Bill Doman. It's been happening. It takes a couple of months to go through all the paperwork to get the artifacts moved. And what happens is the museum curators there, once they get the material and they archive them and check them and everything, and they put them in a safe environment, hermetically sealed, the whole bit. And once it gets into an environment where it's secure, then they will determine who gets to check them out to do the analysis on them and what you're going to do with them. And obviously what you can't do is destroy them. So whatever type of analysis that you want to do, you can't cut it, you can't burn it, you know. So there's going to have to be something without. We're treating these as if they were Native American artifacts. You're not going to take an old Native American artifact and destroy it to figure out what it is, obviously. So this is what we don't want the material just to disappear. And it has happened. Talk to Dr. Roger Lear about it. He'll tell you one of his stories about how samples just disappear. So there's some certain requirements that they have to follow that will meet my needs and Dr. Dolman's needs to make sure that you guys get the proper information and the results for it. And if anybody ever says that weather balloons don't fly over debris site, we actually caught one flying over. One of the, oh, let me go back, click it one more time, since I only have a couple of minutes left. It's actually pretty funny. We're at the debris site. I think that was 2 years ago. And what the heck is that? It's a weather balloon. No, it can't be a weather balloon. It's a weather balloon. So, you know, there is a lot of weather balloons that fly over. Now, you have to remember that the ranchers in that area knew what a weather balloon looked like. And the reason why they knew about it is because a lot of the atmospheric weather balloons that flew over that area, they had little placards on them that had a phone or an address or whatever. And if anything came down on their ranch, there was a reward to retrieve it because there was electronics on board. So another thing about the other, I know I have a couple minutes left, this is a 2-minute warning. The other story is Project Mogul, which was a high-altitude 50 balloon chain monstrosity that went up in the upper atmosphere. And what it was doing was it was trying to detect above-ground atomic explosions from China and Russia. What's interesting about that is it was considered top secret grade 1A, the same as the H-bomb, but the material, the mechanics, the electronics of the actual device was like everyday stuff that we could find at Radio Shack now, which they could find back then. So there wasn't really anything that was so fantastic that made the material and the engineering part top secret. Just the project was top secret. And one of the engineers actually went on record saying, yeah, you know, when Project Mogul, when one of their balloon trains went down, it was not a high priority to retrieve it, because basically it had transmitted already all the information they needed. There was nothing on board that you could pick off. So only the project itself was top secret, not the material. So therefore, if Project Mogul did come down and there was a low priority to pick it up, why all the military to pick it up? Why all the secrecy? Because it wasn't Project Mogul. But that's the bottom line. That's just common sense, just listening to it come out of their own engineers and the Air Force. So you kind of spin it right back to them. That's it. My time's over. Thank you very much.
Chuck Zukowski. Thank you, Chuck. Okay, guys, we have a 20-minute break.
You have to be the biggest skeptic first before you look at any type of UFO investigation. If you don't, you're just going to get swallowed up in the investigation. You start off by trying to eliminate all the possibilities of what the sighting was or whatever the event was. Then you start looking into the non-possibilities or the unknowns, and that's what you start concentrating on. But always address it as a skeptic first. You have to, because over 90% of them are explainable. The whole purpose of my website is to reveal my personal investigations and other people's investigations who work with me to the public. We need to release this information. Let the public decide at that point. If you mask that information, they would never know. And it's really interesting. A lot of people really don't know that much about ufology until you start talking about it. But the bottom line is, you know, I do the work and share all the information to the public. And that's my job.
Chuck Zukowski is an electronics engineer in real life, but by passion, he is a UFO investigator. One of us. Honest. Last year alone, he investigated five cattle mutilation cases in the San Luis Valley. Yeah, that's still going on, guys, big time. But by the way, how many of you think you know everything about Roswell? You don't, but you may know everything new about Roswell at the end of this presentation. Please welcome Chuck Zukowski.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay, I guess you can. Hey, good morning. How are you enjoying the conference so far? Oh, I'm excited to be here. Yeah, it was one of those flights coming in. 2 airplanes were stuck at the gate. Just problems. Made it, finally made it. And it's good, too, because today I'm going to be releasing some information that generally UFO investigators don't do, and that's release information of a site of where I've had an eyewitness actually tell us through an interview a couple years ago where they saw military activity back in July of '47. And I've got a couple of other neat things to show you guys. And then also I'm going to talk a little bit about some artifacts that we found back on a 2002 dig that I participated with the Sci-Fi Channel. And of course, how many people out of here? I apologize, all I can see is lights, so it's a little difficult to try and focus, especially with my contacts. How many people out here remember Roswell? Everybody knows about Roswell. If you don't know about Roswell, you'll know today. And what's interesting about Roswell is, you know, obviously it happened in July of '47, and what was so important in 1947, of course, you know, in June you had the Kenneth Arnold sighting. And I'm just going to do this real quick. I'm just going to run a lot of slides, get you guys up to speed before I start talking about the meat of the presentation. Then July 3rd, 4th, we had Mac Brazel in Lincoln County finding material. He was with his son, Vern. Later on that year, the National Security Act in July. National Security Council, CIA established, Department of Defense. And then the last couple of things I kind of wanted you to see. The fastest airspeed, obviously, in '47 was 640 miles an hour. So you got to kind of remember that, because things were flying a lot faster in that year than what we could do. Angela actually has a really good copy of it too, and some others say it was the White Sands. But what happened in '47 was something came down. I don't know, you can't see it right there. Anyway, I'll just do it right here. Something came down off the right side of Roswell, skipped over near the Foster Ranch, or at the Foster Ranch, and left a bunch of debris. And some skeptics in the past said, oh, nothing will skip. Well, I've always talked about, where you have the Frisbee effect, where you can get a Frisbee to skip. And when we found this little video here, it clearly shows that somebody is filming something coming down and skipping off the ground. And then it skips, leaves a bunch of debris, and then comes down and impacts. So you can see the skip there, and then it's going to come down and impact. Well, that's what happened in Roswell back in '47. The best we can figure was, one of the theories is that there was two craft, and for some reason or another, they collided. Might have had to do with the horrific thunderstorm at that time, and I'll talk a little bit later on about the possibility of radar, direct beam radar could have caused it. But either way, one theory is a skip or a hit. One went down over in Lincoln County. The other one, the plains of St. Augustine. So that's one of the theories. And these basically are the key players, individuals and their roles. And I'm going to go over this just real quick, just to get you up to speed, of course. Mac Brazel, we'll just start at the top left. Mac Brazel obviously found the debris. He was with his son, Vern. Original stories said that he was with Dee Proctor, a kid that lived down the street. Well, not the street, it was really down the next ranch. And it wasn't until we interviewed Fawn Fritz, a little bit later on, you'll see her in the video, that she said, that Vern was out there, his son, and which made a little more sense because why would he be with somebody else's kid? So him and his son, and then of course in September the Air Force was created, and then again Chuck Yeager on October 14th. I'm just checking a couple months to make sure I don't miss anything here. So actually, you had Kenneth Arnold's sighting in June. He basically estimated these crafts were doing 1,200 miles an hour. And then, like I said, in October, you had Chuck Yeager break the sound barrier at, 662 miles an hour. So in June, a few months before, here Kenneth Arnold estimated seeing objects fly twice as fast as what we could possibly do for the technology of that day. So something was out there flying. When people say, well, we think they were birds out there reflecting, well, there were some pretty fast birds that were doing that. Maybe little jetpacks or something. So also, I found this on the internet last year, Tulsa Daily Record on July 13th. So there was also another sighting involving aircraft of unusually high speeds. This particular former military person estimated 1,700 miles an hour. So now we're looking almost 3 times as fast as what Chuck Yeager could do. So what happened?
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army. Army officers say the missile, found sometime last week, has been inspected at Roswell, New Mexico, and sent to Wright Field, Ohio, for further inspection.
What's interesting about this particular segment, and that was the actual audio, and you can find that everywhere on the internet, is what happened. I guess I can use this one here. This little video here, I'm not quite sure if, some people say it came from Area 51. I found it on the internet.